Chapter 1, Body Environment, or BN. Body and environment are one, but of course only in certain respects. Let us carefully define them. The body is a non-representational concretion of, with, its environment. But body and environment also differ in some of their characteristics and doings. Let me define 4 kinds of environment, N. And number 1 is the spectator's environment, what spectators define in their N, which may affect an organism. For example, it is N number 1 when scientists or hunters define the environment of an animal. They define the N factors. They do it in their own terms. Some monkeys live in trees, others are on the ground. The spectator defines these N factors as their, separately from the animal. The spectator may also note something, pollution for example, that is about to affect the animal while the animal does not yet notice. The spectator's bodies interact with, quote, the animal's environment, their own environment attributed to another living body. And number 2 is the reflectively identical environment. It is identical with the organism's living process. Body and in are one event, one process. For example, it is air coming into lungs and blood cells. We can view this event as air coming in or as a coming into lungs and body cells. Either way, it's one event viewed as an in or as body. Here we're not calling it, quote, environment because it's all around, but because it participates within the life process. And, quote, body is not just the lungs, but the lungs expanding. Air coming in and lungs expanding cannot be separate. The point is that we need not split between the lungs and air. Take another example, walking. The same pressure, which is the foot's on the ground, is also the ground's pressure on the foot. We can separate ground from foot, but not ground's resistance from foot's pressure. The in number 2 is not the separable environment, but the environment participating in a living process. The in number 2 is not the ground, but the ground participating in walking, its resistance. The behavior cannot be separate from this ground participating. If body is hanging in air and attempts to walk, its swing will be much wider and it will not move forward. It won't be walking. In deep water, quote, walking will immediately be thrashing. The motions will be different. The body cannot enact the same behavior without the ground. And the ground cannot be ground pressure. It cannot be this in number 2 without the behavior. Without walking, there is still a ground in the sense of in number 1, but not as in number 2. The in number 2 is a function of ongoing living and exists only in that living. The familiar statement, quote, "the environment is a function of the organism," receives here a more exact understanding. We can clarify what the ethologist meant by saying that there is no single reality, only the reality of each species. It is in the sense of in number 2 that each species has a different environment. Of course, its species members are different, but so is the rest of the in. Environment number 2 and the body are functions of each other. In just this sense, there is, quote, no reality, except for the various ones that are implicated in the various living processes. Thus, the body is both equal and not equal to in. Rather than staying with such paradoxes, we're building distinctions and concepts. We have been able to specify some exact respects in which it is and is not equal. Body and in number 2 imply each other. It is basic to this philosophy that, quote, imply is being defined, but we cannot yet define it from here alone. But we can notice that what are usually called, quote, body and, quote, in look different. Even when we say that they are part of one event, foot and ground, air and lungs, they are not lookalikes. The mutual implying between body and environment is, quote, non-iconic. That is to say, non-representational. The muscles and bones in the foot and leg do not look like the ground, but they're very much related. One can infer the hardness of the ground from the foot, the legs, and their muscles. In an as yet unclear way, quote, one can infer means that the foot implies the ground's hardness. Other kinds of terrain or habitat imply different body parts. Since the body and the in are one event in environment number 2, each implies the other. They imply each other in that they are part of one interaction process, one organization. Or we could say each is part of a larger organization which includes the other. Each functions as it does only in this wider functioning organization. This use of, quote, imply also says that the whole event is already there, even if the body aspect or the in number 2 aspect are thought of alone. In number 2 is always in some process and identical with the body in some process. In number 3 is the environment that has been arranged by the body in number 2 process. The body accumulates is a resulting environment. The mollusk's shell, the spider's web, or the beaver's tree when it falls. These are their main environment, but they are the result of the animal's body in number 2 process. In number 3 is wider than in number 2. We can set up a continuum of greater and lesser seeming separability. The beaver's tree seems quite separate from the beaver, a bird's nest also. A spider's web is separable from the spider who will live on and make another if we destroy this web. The mollusk's shell isn't as separate, yet we think it's separate. How about our hair? Is it not a product of the body? But our skin too, and the body too. The body of any creature is the result of its life process. In number 3 includes the beaver's felled tree, but also the beaver's body. The environment which the process produces is wider, but it includes the body. In number 3 is a different way in which body and environment are one. The body is environment. But since this environment is wider than the body, this equation isn't perfect. How body and in number 3 imply is more complicated. See chapter 4, AH4. The bloodstream is often called the environment of the cells it feeds. The many processes in the body have various parts of it for their environment. The skin line is not the great divide. In number 3 stretches from the beaver's tree into its body to the cells. In number 3 is the environment that has already been regenerated by the body process. It is the web, and also the spider's body and its parts and subparts. The life process goes on in number 3. It goes on in the spider's web as well as in its body. The body is an environment in which body process goes on further. The body was made from an embryo engaged in process. The body structure is not only made, but also maintained by ongoing processes. If they stop, the body disintegrates. See the lines on a seashell. A small first part is already a seashell and was the smaller animal's shell. Rings and rings more are added on by growth. The shell has the nature of an action track. It is process concretized. The body's also like that, a record, an action track. When aspects of in number 3 get re-involved in life process, they are thereby also in number 2. Both within and outside the skin envelope body. The process is body in number 2 and goes on in body in number 3. But only some results of life become in number 3. Only those in which it goes on. And number 1 is what the spectator observes all around the body. But the body also has its own environment which it has made. But if in number 3 affects the body only if it is again in number 2, is the distinction only for a spectator? Of course it is one body, not 2. In number 3 can affect the body only insofar as it re-enters in number 2. But then it matters very much that this in number 2 is not all new. It is also already a product of this life process. The process goes on in its own products. Say a different tree is about to crash and hit the beaver. The observer may see that it is about to happen, But the N number 3 does not re-enter the process in that arbitrary way. The very tree the beaver gnaws will not hit it. It will affect the beaver in many ways once it's on the ground, but these will be importantly different from the intrusion of a tree that was not already in number 3. The body implies the environment that the body already, quote, is. Life happens largely with environments that life has produced or modified. The process goes on largely in its own products. The main, quote, environment of any animal is its species members, other animals like it. These are the products of the N number 2 process of the species. In that sense, they are quite obviously in number 3, and when something's going on, in number 2. By far, the greater proportion of animal activity is with and toward them. The mother for the infant, female and male for each other, the group for the individual. These are crucial environments. We must not take the physical environment as our basic model of environment, although that too will often already be in number 3, already organized by the life process when the current life process draws it in as in number 2. And number 3 is the cement you walk on, the mole's hole, the beehive, the anthill, and our bodies and theirs. The life process in number 2 makes itself in an environment in which it then goes on further. We can call it the, quote, homemade environment or the, quote, domesticated environment, and number 3. The use of the word, quote, in is as yet unclear. When I say that the process goes on, quote, in and number 3, because we do not wish to begin with any clear notion of space. We have and use our space, of course, but let us permit new concepts of space to arise from our interactional concepts. We will, quote, derive the distinction between, quote, external and, quote, internal in chapter 7b. Many quite different kinds of space can be generated from the process, both conceptually and experimentally, as we will see. So let us allow this two-directional, quote, in to stand. What, quote, inside and, quote, in mean is no simple question. The simple, quote, in of a skin envelope assumes a mere positional space in which a line or a plane divides into a, quote, outside and a, quote, in. But the ground pressure is exerted not just on the sole of the foot, but all the way up into the leg and the body. From most any single bone of some animal, paleontologists can derive not just the rest of the body, but also the kind of environment and terrain in which the animal lived. In breathing, oxygen enters the bloodstream environment and goes all the way into the cells. The body is in the environment, but the environment is also in the body and is the body. We can say that in number 3 participates in number 2, or we can say that the body in number 2 process goes on in the in number 3. In number 0 is a fourth type. Something may someday affect the life process and be in number 2, but it is not now. This has never happened and is not now any creature's N, not even the spectators. In the seemingly infinite richness of the unborn, something may happen which has not yet, and will then be definable in terms of the process in which it participates. Let us allow ourselves to talk of this now. We don't want to say it plainly isn't, since this has no reality as in number 2, and since in number 3 is the result of in number 2. We need a term for, quote, environment that has never been functioning in a life process. N number 0 is not what does function but has not been recognized. Vast reaches of the universe are involved in our process. These are all already part of N number 2. N number 0 is that with which some N number 2 might come to be, but has not. We need not assume that what is must become N. If something new enters N number 2, it is determined as much by life process as by N number 0. But is N number 0 spatially distinct from what is already in? Or may it be right here in what is participating? Obviously, we must choose the second if we choose at all, because the space relation is as yet undefined. In these definitions, process is first. We don't assume the, quote, body and the, quote, environment, and then put them together. Later, we'll develop terms to speak of the, quote, the body. Right now, it is B and number 2. With latter terms, we'll be able to say what part of N number 3 is the body. Body structure is always involved in some processes, or else it disintegrates. It is a structure from process, for further process, and only so. Body and in number 2 and number 3 imply each other because each is a part of one organization that includes the other. Each functions as it does only in this wider functioning organization. This use of, quote, imply stems from the fact that the whole event is already referred to when we think only of the body or only of the N.